You're listening to Parasearch Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or their affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to this new edition, or the last edition, of the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm your host, Paul Rook, and as always, we are joined by the lovely Kerry Greenaway. Hello, Kerry.
Hello, love.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Good. Have you been up to much this week?
Yeah, doing a lot of research at the moment.
Yeah. Are you going to elaborate?
Well, we're going to talk about some of it on the show, so yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, tonight's topic is the plagues and how it fits into the paranormal. That's going to be interesting because I wouldn't have associated both of those.
Well, you wouldn't, I wouldn't, but then there's a lot of urban legend and haunted tales that are alleged to be victims of the plague, or it was built on top of a plague pit, so it's got to be haunted, kind of things that were being spoken about in the field. And I was like, how true is this? So I kind of wanted to look at it. Yeah. And it's been an interesting study.
Yeah. Well, before we do go into it, do you want to tell people what's going to come up for the Paranormal Concept Show after tonight? Because this is the last Paranormal Concept Show on Parasearch Radio. So do you want to go for it? And I'll give you the pleasure of telling everyone our future plans. Okay.
So as everybody knows, this week is the last week Parasearch Radio is broadcasting, and the Paranormal Concept Show is moving. We're moving onto a new platform, and we've been delighted to be asked to join the Paranormal UK Radio network. So that's where we're going.
Excellent. And we're going to have it linked on the website, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
Because we're going to change the website and everything to paranormalconcept.com. That'll be up and running Wednesday.
Yep.
The link for Paranormal UK will be on there, so people can go and listen to our shows still. So although we're moving, we're not disappearing.
The Paranormal Concept Show is definitely not disappearing, not by any stretch of the imagination. The other guys are choosing their own pathways and going wherever they want to go. I think some people have already announced what their future plans are and have moved forward with that already. And we wish them all the best. So the shows kind of are going to live on. They're not, disappearing. It's just they're changing onto different platforms. And that's great news. So that's a bit of a legacy we're sending out into the paranormal field.
Absolutely, but as long as everyone follows Paranormal Concept Show, it's fine. Doesn't matter about the best. No, I'm sure everyone else will do a fantastic job and keep going, bringing out their shows on different platforms. So, yeah, it's all good. New and exciting stuff.
It is exciting.
It frees us up to do other projects and stuff, which will all go onto the website as well. So you can keep up with me, Kerry and Richard.
Yeah, running Parasearch has been a labour of love for the last 3 years for pretty much the three of us, myself, Paul and Richard. And but it has meant a lot of personal projects and other businesses that we've run have kind of taken a back seat. And this kind of frees us up to be able to continue with our own personal work and journey. And for once, it feels quite selfish, but self-care isn't selfish, and it's the right thing to do. It felt the right time to do it.
Yeah, definitely.
And the network we're going to is PAUK, Paranormal UK Radio Network. It's massive. It's a massive station. It runs a 24-hour live stream of all the paranormal shows. Downloads are available on Podbean as well. And it's very exciting to be a part of that network, you know.
It is, definitely.
And not actually run it. Hashtag yet.
Absolutely.
I am joking.
She's not everybody. She's not. Okay, so tonight's subject, plagues. Did you discover how it all come about?
Well, we first talked about this. We was on a Skype call one night, just
as always,
as we do. You know, these infamous after show chats that we have, and we found a village called Eyam,
yeah,
or
Eyam, could be Eyam,
Eyam, EYAM. Anyway, and it's basically a village that isolated themselves. But this was the 1600s, so this is 1665. And it was down to the vicar, really, who kind of took ownership and said to the villagers, the best way forward to stop this from spreading is to actually isolate ourselves. So that's what they did. And because of that, it kind of stopped the spread. Because obviously everyone gets very fearful of plagues. We're seeing it at the moment with this coronavirus. Everyone's like, oh my God, coronavirus. And so it actually stopped this spreading from the out into the biggest cities that were close to the village, which is quite admirable, really, isn't it?
I'm surprised at that period in time they just didn't say, I'll tell you what, we'll just kill everybody. And then it stopped it.
Yeah.
That works too.
I think there are probably cases of that. I mean, when we look into it a bit more, particularly when we go back into history, there's some horrific ways of people dealing with it. It's quite crazy, really. But, I mean, this started with a bale of cloth. There's something called Wakes Week, which is a religious festival, and the guy had arrived at the village with his bales of cloth, hung them out to dry, but the fleas that were within the cloth, because you've got to remember the cloth back then, it was like wool and stuff like that, so the fleas were transported quite easily. And as he held it out to dry it off and air it, the fleas sort of like bit people, and that's how the disease kind of like spread. So it was something as simple and innocent as that, you know. George Vickers was his name.
Didn't it kill like 42 people in 1666? Mm-hmm. And I can imagine with that particular day they would like leapt to the conclusion it was the devil.
Yeah, they didn't know why. That's the whole point of it, is that they didn't have the, you know, medical knowledge to understand why disease was it was. And actually, when I was looking into like the physician side of things, they worked on humours, which all link to the four elements to balance the spirit. So you look at air, fire, earth and water. And if one of those is out of balance, then it's what's caused the disease. So they look at balancing the humour. So basically, so for example, you had a fever, they would treat it with water-related plants and herbs to bring the fire down, to like dampen the fire, to bring it back into balance. So that's sort of a very medieval way of looking at illness. They didn't have...
That does make sense, but it does make you wonder what they done for earth and wind.
Different plants relate to different elements, you know. So that's sort of where the basis of their physicians' knowledge sort of comes from. But they didn't understand spread of disease. They didn't understand bacteria. They didn't understand anything like that. So disease could be carried in any way. And if a plague like come along, then it was taken as like a wrath of God, you know, that kind of thing. So and you've got to remember at this time, religion plays a huge, huge part in belief system, and it's got to be God's wrath. Can't be anything logical.
Yeah.
So they would look around and how is it being carried around? So it would be look at a bad wind and smell and water and what you're eating and, you know, all these kind of things come into play. So a bad smell is carrying disease. It might not, it's got nothing to do with it, particularly in this particular case.
Not far off from what we do these days. I mean, you know, someone gets ill, the first thing people look at is the diet. So it's almost like, obviously they didn't understand what was going on, but they sort of had some sort of right idea by looking at diets and things like that. So
depended on the problem. You know, it depends on the problem. Obviously. We know now colds and flus are carried airborne, coughs and sneezes, that sort of thing. You know, we know that it can be carried through the air. And we also know that what we put into our bodies, food-wise, affects how we are physically. But they didn't have that link.
No.
In regards to things like plagues, for example.
Yeah.
You know, they just didn't. So when it happens, it's treating the effect, not knowing the cause. So they didn't realise the fleas were the problem. Yeah. And this is when we start looking at it, it really does become apparent, and how people reacted. The belief system really does become apparent between it all. Now, the vicar himself, the rector, William Mompesson, that's a name for you, isn't it?
Yeah.
He wasn't very well liked in the village. So when he suggested isolation, he had to call in the old vicar, Thomas Stanley, to sort of back him up. And they did do what he asked, you know. He even lost his own wife to the plague because she was treating people.
I just read in the research as well that one of his decisions is like it says, if persuading his parishioners to sacrifice their lives was not difficult enough, he was unpopular with the villagers. There's a surprise.
He was unpopular because basically there had been a change in the Act of Uniformity within the religious sectors because of a book. They decided to use the Common Book of Prayer, and the old guy was like, no. So they brought him in, they kicked him out, Stanley out, brought one person in who did conform. So again, they're like, well, we was quite happy before with our old vicar. We don't want a new vicar, you know. So that's why he was unpopular, not because he was a bad person. He was trying to look out for the greater good.
Yeah.
You know, so it was I would say it's a bit of a hero, this one.
Cool.
In all honesty, because that's a very foresighted decision to make.
Yeah, I mean, at that particular time in history as well, you had like Oliver Cromwell as well, didn't you? Trying to get was it Cromwell that was trying to get rid of the priests and things?
Well, that's where the Book of the Common Prayer came in. That was actually introduced by Charles II.
Yeah.
So it was all around this religious turmoil time. They'd come out of that period of change and it kind of hadn't totally settled in. You still had very deeply Catholicism roots, but changed to the Church of England, to change back, Do you know what I mean? It was very
Yeah.
unsettled in regard to religious belief systems. So the outer villages would have been harder to adjust, I think is the word.
Yeah. So now you can see why they jumped to the conclusion it could be act of God.
Particularly at this time, this is the 1600 plague outbreak in the UK. But it all gets... What I noticed was a lot of people got it very muddled. There was a lot of muddling between the original bad outbreak, which was in 1348, to the 1660 outbreak. There's a lot of muddling, and
Okay.
that was very apparent to me
Yeah.
when I was researching.
So people are getting like the two bouts mixed up, sort of thing.
Because it's the same plague. I think that's why
Right.
that it was the same plague. I mean, both were devastating, absolutely devastating. But in the earlier plague, in the UK, we had an outbreak, but ours was worse in the 1600s. In the 1300s one, London actually closed its walls. It just straight away was just like, nah, and closed its walls. When it broke out again in the 1600s, it ravaged, because it came from several different angles rather than just going into London because of the trade routes. And this is the thing with the plague. It seems to follow the trade routes.
Yeah, but that's sort of... I mean, even these days, it follows that sort of route. You've got trade, and you've also got like the travellers, like for holidays and things like that. So that's the only way it's gonna come in and out of the country.
So it's really hard to trace. I mean, going back to the 1348 outbreak, again, there are several different ideas of where it started, but there's no definitive answer. Some people say that China and Asia had a mass outbreak. Some say there were just rumours of bad omens coming out. I saw so many different accounts of where it started. It was quite difficult to pin it down. I mean, you've got to remember, if it had started out there, the trade routes were coming through. So it kind of hit Europe through the trade routes.
Yeah.
So they kind of have it pinned down to one particular town in Europe, the very first accounts. But even that is hearsay. It's like an urban myth. We still don't know definitively. But I found this account, which is kind of what in Europe we would class as ground zero.
Okay.
Which is Kaffa, the town of Kaffa. Now, this is on the southwestern side of Ethiopia. Was under siege by the Romans, and in the offenders' camp, the ones outside the wall, a pestilence broke out. So they had lots of dead bodies laying around, so they just lobbed them over the wall.
As you do.
As you do. Oh, it's great defence, right? Offence,
Exactly. Yeah,
sorry, not
that
defence. And then, of course, in the city, pestilence broke out. Now, the survivors within the city decided to cut their losses, just get out of there. So they all set sail and fled to Italy. So they were hitting Genoa, Messina, those kind of areas. And, of course, they were taking the plague with them because it was actually the plague. And this is where they think in Europe, this is where it comes from. But how it got to that point is, I say, there was nothing definitive.
See, because I mean, I was what I just I don't know. It's like where did that particular strain of plague? How did that come about? I mean, it is obviously a mutation of something. I mean, would it be like a mutation of pneumonia or something?
Don't know. They don't know. They don't know where it first originated. One thing's for sure, we can say pretty much definitively that it wasn't made in a lab. which is where
Yeah.
now everybody goes, oh, people have made this in a lab. It just occurred.
Yeah.
But how that
Act of
occurred
God.
or where it came from, and how it spread to start with, we don't know. And so there was no
Yeah.
definitive answers. But, you know, the ships that sailed from Kaffa arrived in Europe, and they docked at these various ports. And I say, again, there were conflicting reports of exactly what docks. It could have been 2 or 3 docks, you know. Because when the ships arrived, most of the sailors were dead
Yeah.
or ill. And they were covered in black boils and, you know, had flu-like symptoms and fevers. And the Sicilian authorities, like, basically was like, okay, push them back out to sea. Off you go. Don't really
Yeah.
want- Too late. Far too late. Because they didn't realise that rats, they're quite good swimmers. And the minute they go into dock, the rats are off. And it's the fleas that are carrying the disease. So by then it was too late anyway. And that was that. I mean, the disease itself is horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Basically, you start with tingles, like your nerves start tingling.
Yep, I've got that.
And then the boils, and they tend to hit like the like lymphic nodes.
Yep.
So it's armpits, groin, those kind of areas. And they come up in great big black buboes, they call them.
Yeah, just like a big blister, I would have thought.
That big black for the
Yeah.
pus kind of boils.
Nice.
And then the extremities, where your nerves start to die, turns black. Now, this is where the name comes from, the Black Death, because you start turning black, because you start to decompose, where you're dying, your skin's died.
Yeah.
So you
Tissues
smell.
are dying. Yeah.
So you smell. You have a temperature, like a massive fever, and then you get like the flu-like symptoms. And this happens very quickly. It's between contraction and death, 5 to 7 days.
Okay.
That's quick.
So it's quick.
Very quick. Not everybody dies. You can survive it, which is actually later in life where they found a vaccine for it.
Okay.
But at this time, in the 1300s, there's no clue.
Yeah.
No clue
Do you know what?
as to why.
Do you know, like, when they found the vaccine?
Oh, God, that was a lot later. That was like in the 1800s.
Okay.
When bacteria was, like, first discovered.
So they had, like, an idea of what can tackle it.
Now they do.
Yeah.
Because there are cases, but we'll talk about that sort of further on. Because there are still cases. I mean, I found cases like 2000.
Yeah.
There was a massive outbreak in Madagascar not so long ago.
Okay.
But as I say, that's later in the show. But at the time, you've got an incredibly religious mindset, and everything had been going really great. You know, it was actually quite a prosperous time for people. You know, the trade routes were open, business was open, you was able to travel. It was a very opportune time for people at this time. And everyone was plodding along quite happily, really. And then this happens. So it's very confusing for people as to why all of a sudden people are being struck down quickly with this horrifying disease with not knowing on how it was caused. And many theories arose. I loved some of these. These were brilliant. God's displeasure, as we've discussed, obviously. And then all the seers, that's the word I want to use, like the scientists, and that were saying that because the planets had aligned, then it had come from outer space. Like God had sent it from outer space. Always comes back to God, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, it always goes back to a religious undertone. Or that because there have been earthquakes, which when we looked at the Atlantis, the lost city of Atlantis, we found out then that there was a hell of a lot of volcanic activity around that time.
Yeah.
And because of these earthquakes, that it had been released from hell. So it's not logical.
Yeah. I suppose in a way it was almost like a godsend for the churches because they'd tell people this sort of rubbish and they'd flock to the churches, wouldn't they?
Well, groups of people, not such a good idea in this kind of like scenario.
Well, yeah, exactly. Spread it, share it's caring, as they say.
As they say, yeah, you know. But people kind of went into two different ways with this. They either it's a bit like when it starts, it's like 1 or 2 cases, and then it's 3 or 4 cases, and then it takes a while for the momentum to build into fear.
Yeah.
So the physicians first started just treating these people, but not really knowing how to. And as it went on, some of the cures were actually quite amazing. Some of the thought patterns, I could dread to think. Bloodletting, which was always a fave.
Yeah.
Tends to weaken the system, though, right?
It does, yeah, absolutely. And it lowers the iron in your blood as well, doesn't it?
So it kind of like, in regards to like
Causes other problems.
fighting it, yeah. And we're not talking a hygienic scenario here.
No, definitely not.
You know, sanitation wasn't what it is.
I mean, one of them that makes me laugh is pigeons used to suck blood.
Because pigeons are going to do it, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Now, because they believed in the humours, you know, we talked about the humours, smell. So burning sweet-smelling herbs and things like that, very relevant even. Sorry, I'm a bit slurry tonight. Haven't even been drinking. And they thought because it was airborne, if you sweeten the air, then the miasma, is what it was called, would not be a bad thing. So it would kill all the bad stuff in the air. So that was fine. Now, I did find one cure. This is quite horrific. Get some lavender, lilies, and human poo. Mix it all together. Spread it on your sores.
I'll tell you, if your kids get ill, you know, they're going to love that one.
I thought that was a great cure. It didn't work, but you know. Hot onions as well was put on the sores.
Okay.
Which is
I know
weird.
they done that. I think it could be sort of like an equivalent of. I think didn't they put rub potatoes on warts?
They used to do all sorts of weird stuff back in the day, didn't they?
It was more like it was old wives' tale or witchcraft type thing. I think like it was to get rid of warts, you rub a potato on it and then bury it under a full moon. And the idea was that it basically transfers the wart to the potato.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the potato dries and dies, so does the wart.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah. Weird belief systems back then.
Absolutely.
But you say that recently on social media, they've been talking about to draw the toxins out of your body, you should put an onion, not a hot one, just a normal one, a slice of onion on the bottom of your foot and put a sock on, sleep with that, and it will withdraw the toxins.
Yeah.
And a verruca, banana skin. And I've tried that and it worked.
I've not heard that one, but okay.
That worked. Bazooka your verruca didn't work.
No, you get a banana instead.
But, God, you know, my son had this verruca, wouldn't go, and we tried so many treatments, and it was just eating his foot away, basically. And I went, let's just try the banana. And he was like, oh, don't be stupid, Mum. It's one of your things, isn't it? And I was like, just try it. It's one of your weirdo things. And I went, just try it. We've tried everything else. Yeah. And he was like, oh, okay. And it went, using the banana skin. So, method in your madness.
Absolutely.
And when I had IBS, I tried all the Western medicine. Nothing worked. Yep. Went to a Chinese doctor, herbology guy. And, I had to drink this foul potion thing that I had to brew up. And I had acupuncture. And it worked.
Okay.
Sorry, excuse me. So, we're laughing at these kind of things, but that's where all these things sort of date back to, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, that, as I said to you, that some of the old remedies, they do have something to them because they obviously work. We might not understand how they work or why they work, but they just do. And, go for it. It's always worth a try.
Well, if you don't try it, you don't know, do you? But I would put a block on using human poo with lilies and lavender.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be very hygienic. No.
But they tried it. Didn't work. But nothing was going to stop this, in all honesty. It was one of those things. Now, people reacted in different ways. They stopped because they didn't know how it was being spread. They reacted in strange ways. So they stopped washing. They changed their diets because if it was carried by water, then they, stopped washing. They changed their diets. I love this one. Stopped taking naps in the day. I thought, God.
We're all doomed.
Yeah, we're doomed. If you stop taking naps, God.
Yeah. But even because they changed their diets, they've probably been doing some good just by doing that.
Depends on what they changed it to.
Well, yeah. But I don't think they had like cheeseburgers and McDonald's.
What we have now, do they?
No, ye olde McDonald's maybe, but yeah, I don't know.
There's a concept. Ye olde McDonald's. Now,
but go on. I was going to say you found out something really interesting about the suits that the physicians used to wear.
Now, this was really, really interesting. I love this. Now, it's iconic, the beak mask that the plague doctors used to wear. Now, one thing I will say, this was only in the 1600 outbreak, in the late 1660s, not the earlier outbreak. So they would wear long leather, like smocks, gauntlets, and then this headdress thing, wouldn't they, which had a long beak. Now, the beak would be filled with a compote of lavender, camphor, white wine vinegar, apple cider vinegar, all sorts of things like that because of the smell. Sweet smelling herbs, that sort of thing. And the eyepieces, now, they believe because it was like transmittable, they didn't know how it was transmitted. So to protect the eyes, so basically their head covered from head to toe, but the eyes wouldn't have been covered. So they used to use like a filter, like a red stone that was carved very, very thinly across the eyepiece. So you can imagine if one of those walked into your house, it's like terrifying. And the cane, always shown with the cane, was so they didn't have to touch the patient. So they could just sort of like lift clothing up and peer it. Peer it in.
Yeah.
Go, oh yeah, you got the plague. Oh dear, going to die. But
they used to, it was like thin slices of red stone, didn't you say?
Red filters, yeah.
I don't believe that. I think they just got a tin of Quality Street or something and just got the little red wrapper.
Bless you.
That's it.
Well, I only found one reference to that, to be fair. And all the masks
Okay.
I've seen haven't had the filter, but whatever they were made out of was probably long gone now.
Yeah.
But
I suppose it depends on what sort of quality street wrappers they use.
it's a bit like ye old McDonald's, ye
Yeah.
old quality street.
Ye old quality streets. But I've got to say, right, there are other sweets available. I mean, you had ye olde roses.
Oh my lord. But it was generally considered isolation was the best way forward. So anybody that was infected would be isolated. Now it started off by just putting them into like outhouses and sheds and stuff like that, but then
Yep.
it ended up being entire families being isolated, and you know this happened, and this was across Europe, not just London at this point, or the UK. So you know, in places like ports, they would quarantine for 40 days. Now, in Venice, this is one thing I found out. Porvelia. Everyone said, oh, they just shipped all the plague people over to there. That was later. What they actually used it for initially was the quarantine for the ships for 40 days to see if they were infected. If they were, then obviously they stayed on the island. They weren't allowed into Venice. But all ships, all inbound ships into the ports had to wait 40 days outside port before they were allowed into the port to try and control it.
Okay.
But that's where Pavelia started in regards to plague. It was actually a quarantine area, not,
okay.
you know, later on they started shipping the plague victims over there. But to start with, it was just a quarantine port.
Interesting. Yeah. I know. Like London as well isolated itself, but still you had like 50,000 people die.
Yeah.
So that obviously didn't work too well.
No. I say once it starts, once you get one, it's so virulent because it's fleas that's carrying it. So a flea could bite 5-10 people in a day, if not more.
Yeah.
And the fleas are on the rats are carrying the fleas, and rats aren't quarantined or isolated, are they? They're in and out. So it's...
Well, that's it. I mean, it's. I mean, if they didn't connect the two anyway in the first place,
No.
you know, it's gonna have no effect.
No. Exactly.
And, you know, I don't think they did they?
No,
to begin
not a
with.
clue.
They didn't realise it was the rats and the fleas.
But you've also got to remember society hasn't got hygiene standards in place, and their accommodation isn't like it is.
Obviously not if they're defecating all over their sores. I mean, no.
Well, they used to just do it in a bucket and chuck it in the street, for God's sakes. I mean, that's still going on, weren't it?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so rats were everywhere. And fleas and ticks and those sort of, you know, insects are really prevalent. And because it was that was carrying the disease, that's why it became so uncontrollable. But, you know, 50,000 died in London. They reckon 30 to 60%, and again, figures are not exact on this because it's so, the 1300 ones, a lot's happened since then. You know, a lot of records have got lost, and whether or not it was recorded properly, because there are better things to worry about, you know, is the key point of this. So it's estimated, but they reckon 30 to 60% of the population of Europe, and that includes the UK, what was wiped out in this first bout of the plague. So people started praying to various saints because they thought that would save them. Saint Sebastian. Now, he'd been pierced by arrows but survived. So it was like he managed to survive against all odds. So he'll be a good one to pray to.
Yeah.
Didn't really work. So they then changed their allegiance to... I never heard of this saint. Saint Rock.
No.
And because he survived the Black Death.
I think that's who they went to, like just after they prayed to St. What's his name? Hulk Hogan. You know.
I bet The Rock would be well happy with that.
Yeah.
But he'd survived the Black Death, so that's sort of like understandable why they prayed to him.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
But the amount of bodies, the toll on the death, you know, you've got to remember it's affecting across the board. It's not socially selective. So you've got a lot of priests dying, a lot of physicians dying, a lot of people in power dying as well.
It sort of broke society down.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and you know, a lot, as you said like before, like a lot of people were worried about being buried without the last rites.
Yeah,
and you know, condemning them to purgatory or hell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you haven't had the last rites, then you can't ascend.
Yeah. So I can imagine that's going to play on people's minds as well.
Yeah,
especially back then.
Very
Not so much these days.
No,
yeah.
People would be like,
what did you? Because there was also a bit about Pope Clements VI.
Mm-hmm.
What did you find out about him?
Well, because of this society breakdown and the panic of this burial and death scenario, he actually granted a blanket absolution of sins to try and calm everybody down. So basically, if you die because of the Black Plague, don't worry about your last rites because I've done it, kind of thing.
Okay.
But he when it hit Avignon in France, I've already said that wrong. Richard will slap my legs later. When it hit there, that's actually where the church leaders were based. So all the cardinals and the Pope was in Avignon, not at the Vatican. So this is where they were at the time. Now, he managed to survive after isolating himself in the chambers. He had 2 fires and he was burning herbs and scented woods and stuff. Now, quite a lot of his cardinals died of the Black Death, but he survived. He managed to get away with it. But, you know, good old Pope Clements VI was sort of just holed up in his chambers, not really being that great, really, because society, like you said, broke down and people went sort of like one of 2 ways. They went, well, this is my last day, I'm going to live it like I've never lived before. And partook in basically every single deadly sin. Good. Which probably didn't help matters. You know, there was a lot of debauchery, a lot of alcohol consumed, you know, violence. You know, you could imagine if society breaks down, it's just
I think it breaks down. I think it breaks down like that every Friday night, doesn't it? Friday, Saturday
Seems to in Essex. Or you go ultra religious and you would try to atone for all your sins, and this is where the flagrants came out, which was a really extremist religious group. And they would wander Europe in groups and they would walk for 33 1/3 days and stop at a village, and then in the evening they would sort of form a circle in front of a bonfire and then chant and get themselves into a religious, I don't know, frenzy, and then they'd fall to the ground, and they would fall to the ground in a pose that reflected their greatest sin. I just dread to think some of the poses. And then the leaders would flog them.
Nice.
With like cat of 9 tails. You know, we all know those with the several strands.
Yeah.
And the tips would be like a metal barb or a metal ball on the end. And
yeah.
Get up the next day, off they'd go again. Which is horrible.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
The other side of it, which people probably don't realise, Before the plague hit the villages, fear runs faster than the plague.
Yeah.
So people are hearing about it in outlying villages way before they actually get the plague infecting the villages. So they look for someone to blame. So they look for a reason external of themselves as to who or why they're being punished by this plague coming along. And anti-Semitism comes into this at this time. And this is mainly Europe, not London or the UK. This kind of hit the Bavarian kind of countries that have always had a bit of anti-Semitism going on. And whole communities of Jewish people, they were blaming the Jewish people for crimes against us, you know, like the true believers, like the right religion. And whole communities of Jewish people were wiped out on basically the fear of the plague.
Yeah.
Which again is horrible when you think about it. But it all comes down to this fear of God punishing us. We've done something wrong. Oh, who else is... They say they're the right, you know, the true religion, but we believe we're the true religion. So it must be them, the interlopers, that have caused this, and God's angry at us because they're not the true religion and we've allowed them in. So it's a very mental gymnastic people do to shift blame. So, you know, that happened too.
Because you're also coming towards like the end of the plague as well. Because you got like after 40 million deaths or so, it just stopped.
Yeah. But think about the life cycle of a flea. It's very prevalent in hot summer months. Come the winter, fleas die out.
Yeah.
So that's why. Now, it did reoccur over the next few hundred years, but it never hit with the virulence it had. But then society moves on, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, things change within towns and societies. I mean, it wiped out a lot of people, cleared a lot of ground, as it were. So there's not the population density that there had been before. It takes a while to build that back up again. And as it builds up, things like, you know, your living conditions and sanitation improve.
Yeah.
So that could be why.
Wasn't it also the fact that we had the Great Fire of London?
Now, that is a fallacy.
Well.
That is actually a fallacy, because it was... yes, it did a lot to clear the slums in London, the fire, but it wasn't actually linked to why it ended in the 1665 plague. That was the worst one to hit the UK, the 1665 to 66 plague. And again, there's several points of starting point for London in particular. There's Great Yarmouth, there was down in Bristol, and then there's the London ports. Now, in London itself, it actually started in St Giles in the Field.
Right.
That's where it started. But again, it's overcrowded, it's poor, you've got a lot of rats, a lot of bad sanitation, you know, that sort of thing. And this is where we start seeing the more iconic belief system in regards to what nowadays, when we think of the plague, this is where those imageries start coming in, you know, of the beak nose and the house doors with it, with the black mark on it, and the bring out your dead and all those sort of things. But this is kind of where we sort of start. We sort of do a full circle on this because, you know, this started with the plague pits.
Yeah.
And we were saying, you know, God, there's plague pits everywhere. Now, when I looked into this, I was really surprised, really, really surprised that the only plague pits we know in London are from an account from 1722 by a guy called Daniel Defoe, who wrote a year journal of the plague. Now, when he released that, he was older, But when he witnessed the plague, he was younger. He was a child. So it sort of come out later. And that's the only reason we have an idea of where some of the definitive plague pits are.
Yeah.
Now, there are plague pit maps online, but a plague pit, everyone's head imagines huge, massive, thousands and thousands of people being buried in these plague pits. And that's not the case, actually. What it is a plague pit can hold anybody from 2 or 3 people up to, the largest that they found is 1,200 people, which is still quite big. But that doesn't account for all the mass graves that are in London. But it's almost like a blanket term that people have put over any mass grave now. It must have been a plague pit.
Okay. Yeah.
Because what would happen, because it was parishes. Let's look at parishes. So every area in London has its own parish, and every parish is responsible for the deaths within that parish. So if somebody dies in that parish, it's the responsibility of the church to bury them. So where they could, they actually buried them within the churchyard. If there's no room or they're overwhelmed, then sometimes they would ship bodies to an external or the next neighbouring parish. And remember, London at this time was a lot more green than it is now.
Yeah.
So there was a lot more room. So the majority of plague victims were actually buried within the parish church grounds.
Okay.
Which, when you think, everyone goes, 100,000 people in London died. That's quite a big area. That's a lot of people in a short space of time, but it is over a large geographical area. Now, there were plague pits made, I'm not saying there isn't, where they would bury a lot of people in a plague pit, but they're not as big as people think. So, like, they might, in one day, dig a pit that would hold, say, 40 or 50 people.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
now,
no, that makes sense.
Also, there's another factor that they would bury outside the walls. You know, like they would go, when it got really bad, they would start doing it outside the walls. Now, the majority of parishes would have something called a potter's field, where paupers' graves were buried and, you know, criminals and people like that were buried in. And it's more likely that these mass graves are actually paupers' graves, not necessarily. So it's like everybody was buried in there, not just plague victims.
Yeah.
Now, they can only account for 2 of the account of Daniel Defoe. All the other mass graves in London are not necessarily plague pits. They could be paupers' graves, mass paupers' graves, or Romans used to bury in, if you was just like a normal person, this is, you know, Romans were burying mass graves. So there's a lot of mass graves. I'm not saying there isn't. It just not necessarily plague graves.
Yeah, so as you said, it's more of a blanket term for mass graves.
And
okay.
I think the other term people think is mass graves can relate to more than one.
Yeah.
So it could be 2 or 3 people in one grave, and that would still be classed as a mass grave.
Okay.
And also, mass has a double meaning here because of the rites being said over the grave by the priest or the rector would be classed as a mass, a death ritual mass over the grave. So it's got like a double meaning there, which is all very interesting.
It is, absolutely.
I found this fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, going back to like when the plague hit London, you had, was it King Charles II and his court left to go to Oxford.
Yeah, a lot of people fled.
You know, yeah.
You know, if
Yeah.
you had the money, you fled.
Absolutely, and even Samuel Pepys gave a vivid account of the empty streets in London. I think maybe that's why people associate the Great Fire of London to wiping out the plague, because Samuel Pepys also wrote about that, didn't he?
Yeah.
Or did you
But
not know that?
again, they collected dead bodies at night because there were less people around, so less people spreads the infection. So they would do that at night because then there's not many people around to spread the infection. It's quite a sensible measure, you know,
Yeah.
not to hide the amount of people dying. It was just done on a pure hygiene reasons. And actually, the other side of it is, again, very iconic image, a death cart going through the streets of London collecting all the dead bodies.
That just reminds me of was it the Holy Grail? No, one of the Monty Python movies. It's like, bring out your dead. He's not dead. Like, he will be soon.
I'm going to kill him off.
Yeah.
But
Gone dead.
yeah, I just found the whole subject incredibly fascinating. You know, different accounts
Yeah.
of the 1600 one. That's definitely more documented than the medieval one. But even then, we don't know true figures. It's all very murky because a lot of records were lost in the fire, you know, after the plague. You've got a lot of big things go on in London, so a lot of these records are sort of like lost to history. And
Yeah.
like you say, you know, they have better things to worry about, quite frankly.
Well, one interesting thing I see in your research that you sent over, that obviously it spread to many parts of England, but York was one city that was badly affected.
Yeah.
And the plague victims were buried outside the city walls.
Yeah.
You know, it's never been disturbed since.
No.
And they reckon that the grassy embankments below the city walls are the sites of these plague pits.
Yeah.
So when I go to York, I'm going to have a look around and point them out to people.
That's a plague pit, that is.
Yeah,
But a
look at
lot
that,
of people
plague
in
pit.
London don't realise that some of the open spaces that, like, the parks and stuff, are
Yeah,
actually, like, underneath it all. There's plague pigs. There's mass burials under there. But as I say, we don't know definitively where they are. Now, I found maps of mass graves, all named as plague pits. But when I looked at the British Museum, they didn't mark them as plague pits. They marked them as just mass graves. And some of them go back to Roman times. Some of them are Neolithic. You know, there was lots of different historical periods, not just the plague,
yeah.
that were marked as the same area. So, you know, and if you go outside Fenchurch Street, there's a church there. Now, there's a plague pit there that's only got 45 people in it.
Okay.
And it's quite common for a grave to be used more than once anyway.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah.
You know? So,
Because they do it for families as well now, don't they?
yeah. Well, they always have done. You could have your plot with your grandmother, father, kids,
That's it.
all sorts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't they find some pits when they were digging up the underground?
Well, again, I looked into this. Now, some people say that when you look at how the underground runs, it's never in a straight line because it's avoiding the plague pits. No evidence of this whatsoever.
Okay.
No evidence of it. Now, you know, some have said, oh, you know, like there's one where Brompton Road meets Knightswick on the Piccadilly line, I don't know, somewhere like that.
Knightsbridge.
Yeah, around that area. That the earth was like so densely packed with human remains that they couldn't tunnel through. Well, that's not
Okay.
true at all. It's not true. And they say
Yeah.
that the runway lanes at the Elephant and Castle Junction is blocked off because of a plague pit.
Okay. But that's not true either.
Well, when people have researched this, they actually pass through the burial grounds, not avoid them.
Right, okay.
You know, I think with a city as old as London, you're not going to miss, you know, certain burial grounds and stuff like that. You're just going to go through it. I mean,
Yeah.
London transport historians said that they've never come across any mention of plague pits in their records.
Okay.
You know, and, you know, historian and author Mike Horn said he's never encountered anything that suggested real or imagined plague pits influencing the construction of the tube. So, you know, they've not... You would think it would be in their records if they changed the route of the underground because of a plague pit. I don't think that's true.
No, and I think, you know, it is quite feasible to think that they did discover some human remains, but I can't think that it would put them off and make them change the route.
No.
I think they would just excavate them and bury them in a church, like find a proper grave for them and lay them to rest.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that's what we do these days. You know, if a body's discovered, obviously a historical body, not a murder victim, but so, you know, we sort of excavate it and then it gets buried within the grounds of a church somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And isn't there, just outside Tower Hill, they knocked down a building to build a new building, and they found like Roman remains, and they excavated it and, you know, took all the archaeology out before they started rebuilding again. So London is a metropolis that has been around for a heck of a long time.
Absolutely.
It's at some point, I would imagine, there's bodies everywhere.
There is even some archaeological remains of buildings and villas, particularly Roman villas, where the new building has been built around it. So, you know, you could walk into the lobby of like a hotel or something and they'd have the Roman villa there. And again, I think there's one just around the corner from Tower Hill. It probably is the same building, to be fair, where they've got like a wall going through their courtyard. You know, so you can go and have a look at the archaeological dig site and stuff, and so and it makes sense.
It does. So, on that note, should we take a quick break? Give Harry a last airing.
Yeah, go for it.
Hello, Harry Price here. Good evening. If there's nothing myself and everybody else enjoy here on the other side more is the sit back and relax and listen to Parasearch Radio with its paranormal news, views and reviews from across the UK and beyond. Make sure to find out more about them on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web, whatever they are, to keep up to date with all their broadcasts throughout the week. And I hope you enjoy them as much as we do over here. Hello? Is anybody there?
Okay, and that was Harry Price. He loved us.
He did.
He's listened to every show so far.
I might take him with us.
Yeah, I think we should.
Over to PA UK. I think we'll get it remade and take good old Harry with us when we go to there.
Absolutely. But anyway, getting back to the subject in hand. Ring a Ring of Roses.
Yeah.
Is that attributed to the plague?
No.
Okay.
The symptoms it talks about within the nursery rhyme itself doesn't match. It's sort of like hit more Victorian times, this particular nursery rhyme. There are various vague references to a similar nursery rhyme, but it's not the one we know before this time. So they don't think it's anything to do with that. it sort of doesn't really surface until the end of the 18th century, which is like 100 years after the plague. So, yeah, it's sort of like a bit... It does kind of fit with the old iconic and the roses and the smell and the sneezing and that, but it talks about ring-like lesions where they weren't ring-like in the plague. They were bulbous, you know. So, no, they don't think it's anything to do with the plague at all.
Okay.
But it just seems to fit.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah.
So, yeah, sorry, everybody. That one was...
Okay.
I think what struck me about this is I found loads of anecdotals about the plague hauntings, even in the village we spoke about at the beginning of the show. You know, there's supposed to be hauntings of, like, you know, footsteps. Footsteps seems to be a big one in the inn that's there, the miners' inn, in the AM village. And Chester, a plague doctor, roams the street. But they're all very anecdotal. There's nothing specific, you know. So it's very easy for the ghost hunting community to link it to plague pit, death, destruction, gotta be haunted.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
Especially with the footsteps. I mean, it could be anybody, couldn't it?
Yeah. It could
But
not even
because it
be
happened
footsteps.
in those particular areas. I mean, you know, you've got the Great Yarmouth Fire Station.
Yeah.
That apparently there's a plague pit there
Yeah.
with 50 bodies in it, and footsteps and whistling are heard. How do we know that it's not the fire chief?
It could be a old firefighter person, couldn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
That's, you know, still doing his job.
But because the plague pit's there, they attribute it to that as opposed to... Yeah, so I can understand how... Yeah.
It's like our plague pits are the equivalent of the Native American burial grounds. You know, that's our equivalent. And it's an easy option, isn't it? It's an easy reason as to why they're haunted. I mean, it's an horrific period in history. It's traumatic on a cultural level. It's even now a deep-set fear of a populace.
Yeah.
A mystery illness, wiping people out, society breaking down. You know, like, it is one of those things. I mean, I say we're seeing it acted out now with the coronavirus. You know, the fear of, you know, like, God, particularly, you know, when you look at the newspapers and stuff like that, you know, scaremongering, fear factor going on. Even though in this day and age we're a lot more advanced in our, like, medical knowledge, we know how things are transmitted. We have labs that can work out bacteria and vaccines and stuff like that. So, but back then they didn't. So it becomes a deep-set cultural fear, and it becomes very easy to link any haunting to that period in history.
Well, there's another one there that says York City. A child is seen behind the Minster.
Yeah, York Minster.
And again, that's sort of like, could be anybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that it's attributed to the plague in any way.
No. But because it's seen in the window, it's because of this isolation. You know, she got locked in and is forever looking out the window looking for her family who deserted her. Because there was a lot of that. It brought the worst out in human nature. And the fear of the disease and catching the disease. Bearing in mind, child mortality was very high back then anyway. So you've got... We're very cosseting of family now. They got used to losing family at a lot younger age.
Yeah.
They're used to losing children and stuff like that. So when someone got the plague, isolation was driven into people. They didn't want to be shut up with sick people because they didn't want to get sick. You know.
No.
So, again, that fear of abandonment whilst you're at your most vulnerable or sick, it's easy. It's an easy... It could be a child, Victorian child. It could be any child that's been seen in the window.
Yeah.
But it's easy to say, well, the house dates back to, I don't know, the 1500s, or plague. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's got to be plague.
Well, the next bit in your research talks about the actual bacteria that causes the plague.
Yeah.
And I'm going to insist that you go through this because there's so many words in there that you can't say.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I know you love that.
But it's
you just
medical.
love the challenge.
I thought you'd relish this bit.
Oh, I do, but it's so much more fun just to listen to you go through it.
Stumble through the words. Right. Okay.
So, okay, right. So the first question is, what is the bacteria called that causes the plague?
Yersinia pestis is what the bacteria is called.
Okay, cool.
And it's
Carry
spread,
on.
it's spread by fleas. And and fleas will go in any animal. It's not just like rats. I mean, rats are the most, at this time, most prevalent. But mice, squirrels, anything. Then they pass it on to the next animal because the flea will jump onto the next animal, which helps transmit the disease, right? And then from then, the plague can then be spread directly from person to person. So it starts off with this flea bite. This bacteria enters the bloodstream and then off it goes. There are 3 types of plague. Now, there's the bubonic, which is the one that causes the great big boils in your groin and armpits area.
Very good.
Thank you. Then there's a pneumonic, which is basically where it transmutes from bubonic into pneumonic, which is where it basically drowns you.
Yep, in the lungs and stuff, yep.
Yep. So that's where the flu-like symptoms come from. It then goes into pneumonia, a pneumonic plague. Or it goes to the blood and becomes septicemic.
Yep.
Which is, we know septicemia these days. It's where your blood's poisoned.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. But it's all caused by this same bacteria.
Okay.
And now the plague was actually cultured by Alexander Yersin in Hong Kong in 1894, where he discovered that the transmission of this bacteria was from rodents and flea bites. And a guy called Jean-Paul Simond in 1898, developed the anti-serum for it. So we have these days vaccine for it. Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
But there have been modern outbreaks of the plague.
Ooh.
It hasn't gone away. It's still out there, everybody.
Yeah.
In 1947, India suffered an estimated 6 million deaths. In Vietnam, during the war, it accounted for approximately 80% of the world's cases, but it's predominant in African countries, to be fair now.
Okay.
It hit the United States in the 1900s. Now, this is where rat-infested steamships sailed from the affected areas, and there were epidemics, or I can't even say it, epidemics.
That's right. Yeah.
Occurring in
well
port
so far.
cities. Mm-hmm. Now, the last urban epidemic in the United States occurred in Los Angeles in 1924.
Okay.
So, yeah. Mm-hmm. And we all think it's gone away. It's still out there.
Absolutely. Is there any more, modern stuff, modern cases of it? Like in the 2000s?
Well, in the 1990s, cases have occurred in Africa. I will say this, before everybody gets all worried, most of the cases are in rural areas, not the large towns and cities. They tend to be out in the rural where there seems to be a lot more, like rodents and stuff like that. So, it's the more, those little villages and stuff like that, rural areas, agricultural rural areas. But in the UK, we are no longer deemed a risk.
Awesome.
But if you're travelling, be careful. Because in Madagascar, it's still regarded as the most affected country.
Okay.
And in 2017, there was a mass outbreak in Madagascar. But again, it tended to be in the more rural cities. So, the holiday makers in the big resorts aren't going to really have a problem. It's if you're backpacking, that kind of thing.
Mm.
Yeah.
It only takes one, though, to spread it over to the big cities.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
Yeah. There were 1,297 cases of plague reported between August and October.
Was there any death figures on that, or did they all get cured?
102 died.
Okay.
So the death rate drops. Whereas before in the medieval times, it's wiping out 30 to 60% of the population. Now that's what, 10%?
I mean, that's because we've got a vaccine and we're not throwing onions at it.
As I say, we're a lot more advanced medically now, aren't we? So
absolutely,
and we do have a vaccine. So people are offered it in the medical profession if they want it.
Yeah.
But because we're so low risk in the UK, majority of people don't. It's a bit like rabies,
Yeah.
You just don't worry because we're so lucky.
Well, I mean that sort of raises different issues as well in the medical field because we do tend to over clean everything.
Mm.
That's one issue that the hospitals have got when they get super viruses and things. So you never know; it could mutate and be.
Yeah, it's a possibility. We don't know, do we? It could be that it has mutated.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
That's what we see. I mean, everybody's so quick these days, aren't they, to blame every virus. I mean, I think I've lived through so many, kind of viral outbreaks, and all of them have come back to it was made in a lab and stuff.
Yeah.
In China, or it was...
Well, yeah, I mean, that they even say about viruses and that coming from the ice caps.
Mm. Yeah.
Where they've been frozen in time, and it's stuff that we've eradicated already, but no longer deem a threat. But then, they take it out of the ice and, they can reintroduce it back into the population.
Mm.
So that's sort of another theory.
Yeah. It is an interesting concept, and I think when you look back at, the medieval outbreak and then the 1600 outbreak, the belief system is so prevalent in that, and now it's very, like I say, it's very convenient for the ghost hunting community out there to link alleged hauntings to it. But in retrospect, I don't think so. I didn't come across anything definitive. I mean, even Pavelia, I looked into that quite a lot. I haven't been there, so I can't obviously say. But
yeah,
the atmosphere is one thing. I would probably say it's not plague victim haunting, but possibly more the mental health, like the asylum side of things. Yeah. If there is haunting, again, a lot of mythology and stuff comes up about that particular island. But One thing that did strike me about Pavelia was when I was looking, loads of people have been, considering it's illegal to go there. It seems quite easy to get a taxi over there.
Yeah, I should imagine it is. I mean,
A lot of
yeah,
urban explorers just go up to a boat and go, how much to take me to Pavelia? And they go, oh, it's expensive, but we'll do
money
it.
talks. Yeah, money talks.
So, you know, I was a bit shocked at that. And there are, like, tour buses that go over there. I don't know if they stop, but...
I think they would have had to have, like, special licences for that, though.
Yeah, but a lot of the urban explorers didn't bother. They just sort of went over there.
Yeah, well, a lot of those sort of people don't, do they? I mean, I'm not saying all of them.
No.
I'm sure it is a minority that will literally just go and trespass. Because you get that in the UK as well. You know, you get these derelict places that are still owned by people.
Yeah.
And they're quite happy to cut holes in fences and climb through and trespass.
Well, on the island, it didn't look like they had to cut holes in anything. It's like land on the
Well,
island
no.
and go and explore.
But it's still protected, isn't it, by the authorities?
Yeah, I would think
So
it's
they-
more because
yeah.
of the dereliction of their buildings, that it's for safety. That's why they stop
Yeah.
people going there, not because of any other nefarious devil
Oh,
or
absolutely.
demon.
No, I totally agree. And, you know, one day I'm sure there'll be someone discovered dead on the island that's been there for years because no one knew they were there.
Yeah.
But
It's been quite
that's
funny watching some of the urban explore videos. Though. It's a lot. There's a huge bird population, and every time a bird was going off, they were like, "Oh, what's that?" It was like, "It's a bird."
It's a ghost.
I just heard a
Ghost.
child cry. Nope, you heard a bird.
Oh, dear.
But judging
Yeah.
by the graffiti, loads of people just go over there. And there's vineyards on there, not like.
Oh, is
you know.
it?
Yeah,
Okay.
apparently there's like loads of vineyards over there, but not as in cultivated. They've just
Yeah.
grown. There's probably vineyard or grape trees growing there, and they've just gone wild over there. But yeah. And they like the soil, that type of plant, ashy.
Okay.
God, that's awful.
So is there any other myths that you've sort of dispelled in your research?
No, I think I pretty much covered all the ones I wanted to dispel.
Okay, cool. Well, I think we've pretty much come to the end of the show then, haven't we, really?
I think we have, yeah. Our
Yeah.
last show for Parasearch Radio. It's gonna be
Finishing at
weird.
22:22. How cool's that?
That is very cool and quite relevant for us, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. Yeah.
So
Cool.
tune in next week on PAUK. Our very first podcast will be next week.
And what are we
over
discussing on that? The first show on
We're going for the
PAUK?
gallows.
Oh, that'd be a good one.
We're going to have a look at the gallows.
Excellent.
Because
And
that's quite horrific in its own right.
We're extending the show as well for PAUK, aren't we?
We are.
We're going to do a 2 hour.
Yeah.
2 hours every Tuesday. Yeah. So definitely tune in. We hope you've really enjoyed the show tonight, because I know we have. And we shall see you all on the PAUK network next week. So it's a goodbye from Kerry.
Well, hold on, because we've got one more show on Parasearch going out, which is tomorrow night.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Don't
Okay.
forget. One more.
I'll let you know that one. Okay,
Haunted
so what
Histories tomorrow.
what's she discussing tomorrow?
She is talking about the Eastern State Penitentiary, I believe. I haven't got it.
Oh, that's
Terrible. I haven't even written it down. Gosh, I've already moved on. That's
Yeah.
terrible. But she's got lovely Wes in the studio with her tomorrow evening. She's finishing the broadcasting for Parasearch Radio. Personally, I'd just like to thank all of our listeners over the last 3 years. We hope we've brought you a fantastic range of shows over the time. And they're all still available over on YouTube if you want to catch any of those shows. But for the Paranormal Concept Show, it does continue next Tuesday on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Oh, and I'd like to also add that the Book of Parasearch is still available on Amazon. That's not going anywhere.
No, it's not.
So you can still buy that. It's a collection of our blogs and stuff from us and all the other presenters. Well, some of the other presenters. So you can still go and buy that. $7.99 from Amazon worldwide, except Australia, apparently.
Yep.
Cool.
So that's it, Paul.
So that's it. So it's, as I said, it's a good night from you.
Good night.
And it's a good night from me.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.